Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Great to see everyone. Good morning and welcome to our Columbus Chamber of Commerce's Government Spotlight event. I'm Don DePero, your president and CEO, and I'd like to start this morning by thanking our wonderful Vice President of Government Affairs, Des Bryant, and our Government Affairs Steering Committee, our GASC, and you're going to hear from a couple members of our committee this morning. Thank you for all your work, your hard work. Our Government Affairs Steering Committee helps keep our businesses safe, moving forward, and red tape free. Without further ado, I'd like to thank our underwriter for this morning's event. It is Spectrum. And now I'd like to bring to you a member of our Government Affairs Steering Committee, Tamara Howard. Tamara is the Manager of Government Affairs for Charter Communications. Tamara.
Thank you, Don. Good morning, everyone. I am Tamara Howard, Manager of Government Affairs for Charter Communications. As a longtime partner and supporter of the Columbus Chamber, I am thrilled to be here to kick off this morning's program, the importance of advocacy in engaging elected officials. Today, we will learn more about the lobbying profession, legislative process, and why it's imperative for the business community to be engaged in the regulatory and policymaking process. Our panelists will share their insights and perspectives on why the business community needs professionals that are well-versed in the legislative process and can communicate with the government about your business's desires. I'd like to take a minute to share a little bit more about my company. Charter Communications is a leading connectivity company and cable operator providing superior broadband, voice, video, and mobile services under the brand name Spectrum. We employ more than 7,900 employees and provide service to more than 1,900 communities right here in Ohio. We understand the importance of advocacy and engaging elected officials at every level of government and how vital it is to build relationships with elected leaders to ensure our voice is heard. I applaud the Columbus Chamber for developing this robust conversation and look forward to hearing from the esteemed panelists. I now have the pleasure of introducing Des Bryant, Vice President of Government Relations with the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Des?
Thank you, Tamara, and thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. Government makes the world go round, and today, access to public and elected officials has never been more important. Lobbying, a tool of advocacy, provides access to elected and public officials, acts as an educational tool, and allows individuals interests to gain power in numbers. The presence of lobbyists allows for constant communication and continued support for specific interests. Today, we're going to learn more about the lobbying profession, navigating the legislature, and why it's imperative for the business community to engage in the regulatory and policymaking process. To kick off the program, I would like to introduce our moderator, Tony Bergano, who is the Senior Director of State Government Relations with Hicks Partners and the current President of the Ohio Lobbying Association. A special thank you to Tony and our panelists for joining us today. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, Des. Appreciate it very much. And thank you very much to the Columbus Chamber for having us here today. We are fortunate this morning to have a distinguished panel of experienced lobbyists graciously accept the invitation to participate. And so thank you each for participating here this morning as well. The panelists are Victor Hipsley, the President and CEO of Governmental Policy Group. We have Amanda Sines, who is a partner with Government Advantage Group, and Greg Bennett, who is a partner at Byers, Minton and Associates. So with that, let's kick off our discussion this morning. So let's start with a foundational item here for our discussion. You know, when meeting new people, one of the early questions you usually get asked is, what do you do? And I'll share that I am a lobbyist, and everybody has heard of lobbyists, but oftentimes people don't know exactly what that means. So to our panelists, how do you explain the lobbying profession to someone who is not familiar with it? Let's see, Victor, let's start with you.
Good morning, everybody. Boy, Tony, I wish you would answer that question. That's a tough one. It is, I would say, and I would hope that the other panelists would agree, we are very proud to do what we do. It is a very rewarding, very tough job. The one thing that I think that guides us all is our ethical standard, like you all for any business. That is probably the most important thing. You know, a lobbyist really is somebody that provides information. You know, we don't make widgets. The widgets that we have is information to educate decision makers. So I'm proud to call myself a lobbyist. I know sometimes we go government affairs specialist or, you know, a different name for it. We're lobbyists. You know, we're happy that the First Amendment gave us the ability to educate decision makers. So yeah, there's other ways to call it, but at the end of the day, it is being able to provide information to decision makers, whether that's at the local level, the state level, or the federal level. They cannot be experts. As a matter of fact, everybody on this call could be a lobbyist. You would just have to stop your business and spend 24/7, you know, at the Statehouse. But it's more of a, you know, a way to share information. I'm proud of that. I'm proud to be, you know, be called a lobbyist, and it's a very rewarding profession.
Thanks, Victor. Amanda or Greg, anything you'd like to add to that?
I'll just say that I agree with Victor. I definitely embrace the term lobbyist. It's not something that I shy away from saying or owning as part of my identity. That is what I do. And really proud of the work that I'm able to do on behalf of my clients, achieve their goals via state policy, legislation, regulations. It's something that I'm very proud of and don't shy away from explaining to other folks that that's what I do.
Yeah,
Greg?
and again, agree with both Victor and Amanda here. As Victor had mentioned, this is foundational. Our work and our careers are foundational in the creation of the United States from our First Amendment right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And as Victor and Amanda had noted, we have in a unique expertise in the very complicated world that is government process at all levels of government, from local to federal and everything in between. So, you know, a pharmacist, for example, is focused on being a pharmacist, but there are healthcare related policies that might be introduced or developed, passed, or what have you, or not passed, that could be very beneficial to what a pharmacist does day to day, or detrimental to what a pharmacist does day to day. And we are that connector of the expertise of that pharmacist and what makes his or her job doable and as efficient as possible to provide that service to the very complicated government process and the officials that are making policy decisions that impact that.
Tony, I'll add one other quick one, maybe kind of a sidebar. If anybody's ever seen the production or the movie Hamilton, you know, the constant theme in that production was, I got to be in the room, right? And that's really what a lobbyist does as well. We are in that council hearing, that legislative meeting. They're not 9 to 5 hours, you know. Just, you know, the night before we were here till probably 8 o'clock, and budget hearings go late. So, you know, eyes and ears is a big part of what we do. And you can't react to that if you're, you know, sitting at home on a Zoom watching the video. You have to be where the activity takes place. And that's another important part of what we do.
Yeah, there's the old phrase, you're at the table or on the menu. I think that's definitely appropriate. Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. So who hires lobbyists? Amanda, what kind of entities do you represent?
So it definitely runs the gamut. Everybody interests touch state government. So a lot of people have a need for those eyes and ears at the Statehouse. I primarily work with a lot of professional trade associations. So for example, I represent all of the physical therapists in the state of Ohio. And so that's a consortium of physical therapists that have a membership organization. And some of those dues go to hire lobbyists because, as we know, the state license all professionals and most businesses. So they definitely have an interest in what's going on at state government. So that's primarily the work that I do, is with professional associations, but corporations, individual businesses all have a need for those services as well.
Greg, Victor, anything to add there?
Yeah, sure. Amanda's spot on, and you know, when we boil it down, in reality, every interest and classification in society, whether you know it or not, has a professional representation in some way, shape, or form before the government. I mean, you're talking about even children and seniors and labor groups, healthcare providers, of course, businesses and business associations, individual businesses, no matter how big or small, sportsmen, even governments have their own, representation from a lobbying and advocacy perspective. We also represent, social service organizations and like the Community Shelter Board and homeless shelters. It's never a dull moment, something different every 10 or 15 minutes, because everyone has that special interest and could utilize that representation. We're going from a healthcare issue at 9 a.m. to a energy issue at 9:15, and then an education issue at 9:30. So it is a lot of fun, and it's keeps us on our toes.
Yeah, I'll just echo Greg and Amanda's comments. Look, even the governor has a lobbyist, right? The attorney general has a lobbyist. So they're called liaisons, but they have lobbyists and they represent the interest of that entity or agency. We also, it's interesting, we have 4 independent lobbyists, on the panel, including Tony. Lobbying 30 years ago was much different. It was all done in-house, and companies, corporations, associations would have in-house. It's a little bit different now. They still have some have in-house lobbyists, but they also contract outside to independent lobbyists. We also represent corporations, local governments. How do lobbyists get hired? Well, a lot of times it's you're in the barrel, you have an issue, and you need help immediately. What normally happens is once maybe that's successful, you see the value of what government affairs does. I mean, that's why Des exists. He does a great job on your behalf. Again, back to being eyes and ears, and you understand that that's valuable, having somebody advocating on your behalf. A lot of times people recognize that on the front end, but I would say a majority of times lobbyists get employed because there's an issue or an activity that's probably not good. It's going to, cost you your pocketbook in some regard. And that's usually how we get hired.
And I want to just highlight something that Greg said. Again, embracing that term, where we talked about, we embrace the term lobbyist, and him using that term special interest in a positive way. And a lot of times that is something that is really negatively, has a negative connotation to it. But every single person that is here logged in today has a quote unquote special interest, and making sure that we are communicating that to lawmakers so that they think it's special too and deserving of attention through their committee process or through bills that they introduce, and really flipping the script on what those terms actually mean, that special interest is not a bad word either.
Absolutely. Excellent point. So, Greg, I know that you're involved with the Columbus Chamber, and, most members of the Columbus Chamber are businesses, and the Chamber represents their members on broad issues impacting all of their membership. However, policymakers may also work on legislation that directly impacts specific types of businesses as well, positively or negatively. How can working with a lobbyist directly help somebody's business?
Yeah, I mean, we could be here for 6 hours really answering that question, Tony, but it's a fantastic question for, the Columbus Chamber members here that took the time to learn a little bit more about what we do. As we've said over and over, you as a business, whether small, large, medium-sized, and as a member of the Columbus Chamber, you might have a macro mission or interest as an industry, as the business community, but you also might have your individual interests for whatever reason, because you're in a particular sector that is heavily regulated, perhaps by the EPA, or you deal with Medicaid issues and whatnot. And we all understand as professional advocates that you do not necessarily, and this is no fault of your own, you do not necessarily have the time, especially, or I should say perhaps patience to understand how the government works, and then that interplay of perhaps the differences between how local, city council works in Columbus, and then how that interplays with the Ohio Statehouse, and then how they interplay with our federal delegation. So that's, you might hire as an individual business, one of us and one of our firms to then be that eyes and ears on the ground, to have the time to attend what Victor and Amanda, 20 committees, it feels like, per day during, a budget, like we experienced this week. And we're running all over the place because in every one of those committees, bills are being heard that could and likely would affect you in some way, shape, or form. And this is an overgeneralization, but I think it's a somewhat of a truism. The two most important words in any sort of revised code are may versus shall. And that creates a lot of consequences on the back end if it's one of those words is the one that you are not looking forward to dealing with.
So are small businesses able to engage and advocate for themselves if they don't have the resources to work with a lobbyist? Victor?
Yeah, I mean, look, anybody I think can take the time to come advocate on behalf of themselves or the businesses. I mean, Greg hit it. I mean, we see people all the time that may be in a business and come down on a personal level, whether it's school funding or what have you. You should. Matter of fact, I think we joke internally that if you don't involve yourselves, if you don't vote, if you don't engage, you really have no right to complain. I mean, that's really more my philosophy, but it's true. I think you should engage and involve. I mean, learn the issues, but also an equal part of that for every member that has joined us. Learn your elected officials, get to know who they are, why they vote the way they do, what their background is. Maybe their philosophy is driven from, their past or their profession. And that's also a big part of what we do. To tag on to what Greg mentioned a little bit, we also coalition build, and that's a big part. I think what chamber member, why you're here is coalition building. We don't often go out and ask for yays and nays as much as transferring that information and let that decision maker look. They've got to represent X amount of constituents, and so they do have the power. But obviously, our job is to help them educate them on something they may not be familiar with. So yeses and nos, yays and nays are a big part of that, but it's also being welcome, being respected, being that trusted resource is huge. So Tony, to your point, doesn't matter if you're doing it as a group on behalf of the coalition, as a coalition, or as an individual.
Great, thank you, Victor. Amanda, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I was just going to say individual businesses and groups, it's certainly important to foster those relationships with your elected official because they are accountable to you at the ballot box. And so even though Tony, Victor, Greg, and I know all 132 lawmakers, only one of them is still accountable to me at the ballot box. And so that grassroots is really critical to the advocacy work that we do. And so certainly we always encourage our clients, our members to create those relationships with their elected officials. So those grassroots advocacy is critically important to helping us be successful on your behalf as well.
Tony, can I add on something? It doesn't matter if it's at the city level, if it's at the county level, if it's at the state level or federal level. When we go in on your behalf or our client's behalf, and we deliver some information, it's the toughest thing when a member or decision maker says, you're making a great point, but I have not heard from anybody, in my district or in my, back home. I mean, that's a killer. So engagement, involvement at all levels is key for sure.
Yeah, and I do like both Amanda and Victor talking about putting some of the responsibility on our friends in the elected official arena, because they do recognize that they're representing their own district first and foremost, and the number of constituents that they have based on what chamber they're in or what legislative body they're in and level of government, but they also have their own personal passions and personal policy priorities, and they may be completely different from something that is a make or break issue for you and your business. So they recognize as elected officials that they don't necessarily have a monopoly on good ideas or all of the knowledge at their fingertips to make the best decision. And I would say that we all experience, for the most part, very welcoming, open arms to providing your issues to them so we can educate them and they can make an appropriate decision based on their communities and who they represent.
So Greg, you were hitting on one of the items here that was going to be my next question. And so Why do policymakers sometimes introduce legislation that would have a negative impact on the business community?
I'll be really quick with this one, and then I'll toss it back to Victor and Amanda. A lot of times I just think that legislation, when it gets introduced, I've just got to give everyone the benefit of the doubt that it is well intended. Whether or not it's fully, thought out in the sense of all of the push and pull, you pull the string on the suit coat and stuff, and you never know where that's going to go and what happens. I like to compare it to a balloon too. You think you're solving, one minor issue based off of a constituent that or a really, impassioned plea, whether it be a business or an individual that has a health issue or something like that. And then you say, well, we can find a solution through public policy. And I'm going to introduce a bill, and then perhaps we start to work with the stakeholders. And that could happen at any point. You could do it before you introduce a bill or after a bill, and then let the process figure itself out. But the process is where it's so critical to make sure that whatever gets introduced, however well intended, doesn't have, these ancillary negative consequences. And generally they, there's always an issue in some way, shape, or form. Someone's not going to be happy. But if that's the art of compromise and that's the art of the process. So I would say that's probably why something that you might be, furious about, and understandably so, why don't they know this, would be introduced. But it's also the nature of our government and how the founders intended it to make it difficult to pass legislation and quick. That's why we have, two chambers, and it's a bicameral the process and with our branches, separation of powers and whatnot. So it's just, that's all extremely critical. And I think the number that I ran, of course, I said I'd be quick with this, and I'm longer than ever, but the numbers that you generally see every General Assembly from a state perspective is 9 to 10% of legislation gets passed and signed into law. And that's intended to be that way. But that shows not only that we are defending against very poor things from happening from an outcome perspective, that other 90% that might be very bad pieces of legislation, but it's also highlights the importance of how critical it is to really get in the ears of our elected officials and the staff members and people making decisions, because if it's something you want, then you need to be within that 9 to 10%. Otherwise, you have to wait another 2 years. So sorry for taking up so much time on that, but thoughts, Kevin?
That was great. Victor or Amanda, anything else to add?
Yeah. I think we got to recognize why things get introduced, whether it's at the city or the county or the state level. Some are most important. We've got a transportation budget we just passed yesterday. It's $12 billion. It's important, right? That's roads, bridges, what have you. We got a biennial budget, operating budget at the state. It's 80+ billion, right? Those are necessities. And then you have the other, at least in the state legislature, other bills that are introduced. Maybe some of those are politically, like we judge a lot of our elected decision makers on a scale of, are they more politically motivated or policy oriented? Why is something introduced? Sometimes it's more of, maybe it's a local level, local issue. We know this with East Palestine, or Stein, and I'm from that area and I screwed that up. It's not East Palestine, it's East Palestine. But that is a big issue that's going on right now that is having, an effect on statutory changes. Same at the local level. Columbus went through a flavor ban issue that affected a lot of businesses in Central Ohio. That was health driven, food trucks. So, there's a reason why things are introduced. Some of it is a little pomp and circumstances, and some of it's real. And again, it goes back to the sponsors of that legislation. Why are they just trying to move the needle? Are they trying to take care of a specific constituency, or are they trying to do better good, by their introduction? So
yeah, and I just want to add to that. A lot of times when legislators introduce legislation that is reactionary to a bad outcome or something that happened in their district, they don't think that that's also going to require additional statewide regulation or responsibilities on all of the good actors that are out there. And a lot of times, if there's a regulation that the bad actors aren't necessarily following anyways, you're just creating more hardship, more administrative burden for the people that do it right. And so is it really getting you the result and the outcome that the legislator or the regulator is looking to achieve? Or is it just to do something to say they did something and not thinking about the full scope of effect that that policy could have on all of the other folks statewide?
Thank you. Amanda, how do you represent your clients on issues? What is your average day-to-day like at the Statehouse?
Yeah, so I always like to joke when I do these panels that I think most people have this misconception that a lobbyist is whining and dining legislators, passing out cash and checks to get things done. And that's not what I do at all. I spend a lot of time in my office reading legislation. There's probably 1,000 bills that are introduced in any given General Assembly. And I at least skim all of them, looking for any effect that that's going to have on any of my clients, creating summaries for them, sending it off to them to get input, formulating positions, sitting in committees all day, listening for anything that might come up in the discussion. If a legislator asks a question that spurs something that requires a follow-up, scheduling that follow-up, meeting with legislators, getting to know them. Yes, those personal relationships are a part of our job, and it's a very critically important part of our job, but it's more important for me to make sure that my clients have the information that they need to formulate their positions and strategies to advocate on legislation. Also helping them write testimony and submit testimony so that it's in the correct format, doing calls to action. It's a lot of backroom administrative work that we do. It's not all fun and games and bourbon and cigars, unfortunately. We wish it was a little bit more of that, like people think it is.
Greg or Victor, anything else to add? All right. Greg, is there a difference between advocacy and lobbying?
So the terms definitely get interchanged often, and I think I am I do this because technically as professional lobbyists, government affairs professionals, we are advocating as well on behalf of our clients, and that's, I would say advocacy is, if I had to separate them or delineate them, advocacy is more of the education side of things, where lobbying is actually trying to influence a particular piece of legislation or set of legislation and policies. Again, they can be interchanged, but I think from a legal perspective, there would be differences, and the lawyers on the call here might say, yeah, that's exactly spot on, that there are those very real differences. But that's how I would describe it, just from a macro perspective.
And I would say advocacy is a little bit more personal than lobbying. So obviously I care about my clients. I give them, I take it personally, their issues. But if something doesn't go the right way, I don't have to necessarily live with those consequences like the businesses on this call. It's you that does. So I think advocacy is probably a little bit more personal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just add to it that, look, lobbying, at least from our perspective, whether it's the city of Columbus or the state legislature, we have to register, at least in the state legislature, just like we do at the city. There's ethical standards, and I'm not saying there's not ethical standards if you're, from an advocacy standpoint, but there are parameters that we must follow, and reporting requirements and spending limits. There's just a whole different ballgame with lobbying. We know that, and we take that very seriously. Again, it's for us, again, you have some wonderful independents, on this panel that do this every single day, that maybe add to Amanda's previous comment. We have to constantly follow back up with that decision maker if something changes, because that's our reputation. That's the only thing that we have to offer, is our reputation, to be that trusted advisor. From a lobbyist perspective, I'm not saying that advocates don't, but we do. So there's a standard to maintain that. Why? Because we can't afford to lie or misinform on any one issue or client, because we've just ruined that relationship on behalf of all the clients that we represent. So it's a pretty it's, we sleep really well at night, but it's a high bar, and it's one that we welcome. But I do think from a lobbying perspective, there are certain standards that we adhere to, that we welcome, and we thrive in. Sure.
Yeah, Tony, to add to that as well,
Yeah.
those standards and that reputation is the most critical component of what it is we do as professionals. Victor Amanda's exactly right in the sense of there are these unwritten rules, and knowing that we're all human. When I'm going in to talk to a legislator I'm going in knowing that it might be a difficult meeting to have on a particular issue and a particular client because of their, principles or their district or how they were, how they grew up. It might not be the best meeting in the world, but I'm going to make sure that I go in there and educate them on the client's perspective and try to, argue based on what I know about the person sitting across the table from me and what their personal experiences are. And what triggers them and gets them to, perk up a little bit, perhaps. If it ends up not being the greatest meeting in the world, and that could be just saying, no, I'm not with you on this, and this is why, that's fine. But I don't want to take that personally, as competitive as I am, and I want to put myself out of business by finding policy solutions on everything. I've really got to be conscious about not taking that personal, because the very next half hour, I might be in on a different issue, perhaps a different client, that the person across from the table that just told me no is all on board on, or it could be their biggest priority. And we wipe our hands of the last half hour. I'll figure out something else, and then we'll talk about this one and have a great meeting. So that's key for us to be, understanding and internalizing that we can't take things too personally.
Hey, by the way, I think it's important for the group to know that we also lobby the lobbyist, right? We work with Des. We never disagree with Des, by the way. Whatever Des says goes. But there are times that, Greg and I might be working on an issue together that, we might be on the opposite side of Tony and Amanda. And again, it comes down to respect, decorum, how you deal with things. So, the lobbying, it's a little high, at least at the state legislature, it's like a little high school, right? There's 132 members of the General Assembly. There's about 250, 300 active lobbyists. So, word gets around. And again, it's how you conduct yourself, just like, any of you do in your own business or your industry sector.
Well, thank you. So I think we've kind of hit on this a little bit with some of the last discussion, but, Victor, what would you say some of your biggest challenges that you would face as a lobbyist when you're working on an issue?
I think it's important to highlight what Amanda said earlier of all the things that we do. We are our own researchers, right? It's incumbent upon us really to establish that relationship with our clients, so we have a better understanding of the topic. We are the experts, whether we like it or not. We're going to be perceived as the experts, as well we should be, to those decision makers. So, having the right tools, having clients that understand the value of lobbying and what it can provide, that is the toughest part. And then, of course, communicating that so that that decision maker can understand your point or perspective. It's not a 9-to-5 job. That's challenging. I probably missed a lot of my kids' events, long budget hearings, what have you. But it is definitely rewarding, especially when you're representing entities that, if it weren't for us being in the room, they probably were going to, see a bad fate. So that it is really rewarding, but it is a very demanding. And again, it's demanding because the caliber of which I think the lobbyists that are on this panel adhere to is making sure that we're constantly re-educating and educating decision makers so that they have the right tools to make the right decisions.
Amanda or Greg, anything to add to Victor's comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the challenges that are actually being heightened over the last few years is the hyper-partisanship. And so if you're working on an issue that is, red or blue, that is more challenging, I think, and trying to find that common ground between the two sides. Because when I work on a bill, I want it to pass unanimously, every single one. I want to work with both sides of the aisle, all elected officials, and find that common ground. But I think we have gotten into more challenging dynamics with personalities at the legislature. And it's like, well, I'm not voting for this bill because I don't like the sponsor. And I think that those challenges have become more heightened lately, which is unfortunate because we're all there to do good policy for all of Central Ohio, all of the state. And also, like I said, like Greg and Victor both said, continue those relationships with all members as well, to not be seen as, oh, well, you're working with this person and I don't like them. And that has become a challenge lately.
Yeah, navigating the politics is extremely difficult because we are public policy professionals with an understanding of what's going on behind the scenes from a political standpoint, at all levels as well. That's always difficult because what then that turns into is no matter how right you are or black and white, this is the right thing to do, it might get caught up in politics and it might take time to get to that end. Or you might, Ohio's an incremental progress state. So you want that grand slam at the end of the day, or you propose that grand slam and you hope for a double. And then you'll just keep chipping away. So managing, and then I'd say also managing, expectations of the folks that we work with and the clients. And trying to build coalitions, and we're salesmen essentially, and saleswomen in the sense that I might have to be a salesman to Victor, Tony, and Amanda to encourage their clients that they represent to join for strength in numbers on a particular issue in a coalition, or the Columbus Chamber of Commerce, and then try my best to bring the priority, which I think could also be priorities of their clients, up to the surface there. And I think it all just falls within this, that I had to tell myself it's not always about being right, no matter how right you might feel you are, but it's about also being effective. And that's really critical when it comes down to telling the story, to make, again, that person across the desk recognize and feel that need for the change.
Tony, two quick ones.
Sure.
I think term limits in the state of Ohio has changed things dramatically. That's made it obviously challenging. Back to, basically 2 4s in the Ohio Senate, 2 4-year terms, and, 4 2s, 8 years. It just keeps the churn. I think last year we had 28 new members of the General Assembly, but 132. And so they're coming up with probably the same perennial ideas, which makes it challenging. If it was that easy, it would have been solved, long ago. And then the second quick one is social media. I mean, that has changed a lot. I think a lot of decision makers are driven by likes in social media, as opposed to maybe constituently driven. And that's a challenge as well.
Yeah, that certainly has changed things a lot. Absolutely. Amanda, earlier you had made a comment on, how there's a perception out there that the lobbying profession is, bourbon and cigars and fancy dinners and those sorts of things. What are some of the other biggest misconceptions about lobbyists that you think are out there?
Oh boy. I mean, I think those are the biggest ones. And just that, we're corrupt, we're part of the problem, we're part of the swamp. Those are just some of the ones that come top of mind to me.
Yeah, we certainly hear that, quite a bit. And, again, I think this goes back to the foundational question that we had at the beginning of the conversation when talking about special interests, and everybody is represented from a variety of special interests, everything from, things that people might automatically think of like the NRA or, things of that nature, but, your public libraries too, they're all special interests. So,
and I think, what's really disappointing to me is when legislators embrace that narrative, because it is easy for them, for their constituents to understand, like, I'm not going to be beholden to lobbyists or special interest. And just that narrative is very frustrating because they know that's not what we do. So that's frustrating when it gets perpetuated by people that know that's not correct.
understood. Greg, Victor, any other thoughts?
I mean, we look, I think when we all joined this profession, we knew would be a punching bag, along with, my father was a car dealer, and I'm not a lawyer, but that's another category, and elected officials. So it's not for the faint of heart. I think the best thing that we can do to educate folks on what lobbying is this very session. To educate folks on the value of engagement, collectively or independently, because quite frankly, everybody's a lobbyist. The only difference between us and most is we get paid to do that for the very reasons we discussed earlier. So I would consider everybody, on this Zoom call a lobbyist.
Well, we have had a few questions come in on the chat, so I'm going to try and jump over to a few of those. So we have, I'm always intrigued about how each of you lobby the opposing party. What do you do specifically to earn their trust? Greg, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, that's always, it's fun, for lack of a better term, to try to figure out how to strategize on an issue that I know might not be particularly welcomed in a particular political affiliation. But as we all know, there's a lot of gray area, especially in public policy. And it's, first and foremost, I would say walking into a legislator or any sort of elected official, administration official's office, my number one goal is to not let them realize perhaps where I personally come from on the political spectrum. That's not why I'm there. And I might take, the arguments when I'm making the argument for a particular public policy issue and direct it towards how a Democrat might feel about particular things on public health and the environment, or investments in, communities, education, et cetera, right? And then I might also have to switch that message, again, the very next 15 minutes, walking into a Republican's office. I'd like that person to perhaps think that I am, tried and true, coming from where I'm saying as them being a Republican and whatever their personal principles are within that own spectrum of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But that's a fun, challenging part of the job, is going in and knowing that it's going to be an uphill climb, but it's extremely rewarding when you end up getting that yes vote. I mean, Amanda's spot on with, we are competitive and we want unanimous votes at the end of the day.
And I think also it's really important to not ignore that an issue that you're working on might have opposition, and sometimes getting out in front of it and being the first to acknowledge the opposition, and then taking that opportunity to proactively counter that argument. I think sometimes that's helpful to do, not try to pretend that it doesn't exist. And again, it goes back to that honesty and the credibility that we try to have with lawmakers. So sometimes that's a good strategy to use.
Just to add to it, it doesn't matter. To us, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat, a Republican, an independent. We're there to provide honest, ethical information. That is what we do. And the issue is the issue. And quite frankly, I think whether we go into a Republican or Democrat's office, now remember, there's factions, you got factions of each, right? And certainly in the Statehouse right now, we got a lot of different factions of each. The success story is whatever they are, they think you're the same thing because they trust you, right? And that really is the common denominator. For us, I don't think it really matters if it's a D or an R. It's, do they respect you? Do they consider you a trusted resource? And really, that's it. That's what the success story is.
Yep. And they said it better than I could. And then Amanda, you mentioned as well, and I've seen every one of us do this in meetings that we've been in together, either on the opposing side or as proponents together. It's really important. And this goes into the honesty and trust, and you building that trust. We all go into legislator meetings and we will tell them what our opposition is going to argue. We're giving our opposition's position to them. The reason that we do that, as Amanda had alluded to, is because when that opposition does come in, we've already, retorted on everything that they're going to bring up. And we have that legislator or that official ready to go and have that in the back of the mind. Oh, I heard this, and this is what Greg had said. I heard this, and this is what Victor had said about that. And then they can ask questions and really dig into what that opposing viewpoint is saying, and then make the best decision based on the pros and cons at the end of the day for their district.
Absolutely. The lawmakers are going to hear these comments anyway, so you may as well address it up front. Absolutely. We have another question here that says, beyond Columbus and Franklin County, are you working with local governments and public school districts inside Franklin County? Anybody want to jump at that one? You know, I think I would say that, you know, the folks on the panel here are primarily Statehouse focused, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we don't work with entities all around the state. But you know, let's see, I've seen Greg, Victor, you've both unmuted, so please jump in.
Go ahead, Greg.
No, please, Victor, please start. And I'll finish.
Yeah, I just, you know, one of our clients is the Ohio Township Association. There's 1,108 of them, you know, across the state, and obviously Central Ohio is a big component of that. We've got some rural townships in Franklin County. We've got some large urban townships in Central Ohio. So yes, you know, and again, that also creates a situation where we're not just lobbying the Statehouse. And as some of you may know, from a county or a township perspective, they need express authority from the General Assembly to do everything, unlike, you know, home rule city of Columbus. And so that causes an engagement at the downward spiral from the Statehouse to Franklin County, obviously with city leaders. It could be anything from water, sewer, annexation, economic development. I mean, we've got Intel is a great example of that. So for us, yes, we do. It's just not for the Statehouse for us. We do work the local issues as well, and certainly do so here in Franklin County.
Yeah, and I'll just say, so one of our clients is the Ohio School Counselor Association. And so we know that legislators and all elected officials really want to create that career readiness in their students. So we're graduating students that are career ready, can get out into the workforce, and, you know, understanding that that looks very different in the city of Columbus public school system and Dublin. And so having a statewide organization that can bring those perspectives from all across the state and coming up with a statewide policy can actually be challenging, because, you know, dealing with what type of investment are we doing, the needs of the students are going to be different. Their ratios are going to be different in Columbus than they would be in Dublin. And so I think, you know, even if working with a statewide organization, you're always taking in that local perspective, because we do have a pretty large dominant of rural Ohioans in very strong leadership positions. And so making sure that they understand that what's happening in Adams County isn't what is happening in Franklin County. And so even if you are dealing with a statewide issue, you still have to bring home that local perspective so that they understand that the needs across the state are a little bit different.
So,
Yeah.
oh, so go ahead, Greg.
Just Ohio's a diverse state. We've got 5 little regions, and then within that, a whole bunch of different entities and the 88 counties and what have you. And it is refreshing. You know, it's kind of a local government microcosm of what the Columbus Chamber does, where we're seeing a lot of this regional approach to effective advocacy at the state level and the federal level, showing that the Franklin County, City of Columbus, suburbs, and then expanding out to the 11 county Central Ohio region is critical to sending a signal that we are all, for the most part, in lockstep, really passionate about working together, even though we have diverse communities within that 11 county region. I grew up in Cleveland, and I worked for a state senator from Zanesville, Ohio. That was a wake-up call. My wife is from Zanesville, Ohio, and so I'm very familiar with the area now, but it is not Cleveland, Ohio. So I had to learn that, and very different issues and a different set of problems, but also a different set of things to be really proud about as well. And our firm does represent the city of Columbus. And, you know, the common symbol is the state of Texas, right? The big red state with the big, or I should say the blueberry right in the center of Austin, Texas. We have a couple blueberries ourselves. in the state of Ohio as local governments, and we know how our state government is set up from a political power perspective. So that the representation, like Victor with the OTA and the work that Amanda does of local governments is critical, no matter Republican, Democrat, or what have you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. So Des messaged me, and I believe he had a couple questions. Des, would you like to take that over?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tony, and thank you for our panelists for all of your answers and insights and perspectives on this matter. Folks, if you have questions, I will be reading some of the questions from the chat box. But to start it off, when it comes to the proactive nature of what it is that you all do, and that you are representing businesses throughout the year, right? That may not have immediate issues or problems, but you are representing their interests at the State House and other low levels of government. Could you speak to why it's important for businesses to have your services and seek your guidance, even when there's no fire to put out? Because you don't want businesses to come at you and seek your services only when there's issues, but you want them to ensure that you have a seat at the table before even issues pop up. Can either panelists speak a little bit more to that and the importance of being proactive when it comes to various issues that's happening in the state legislature?
I guess I'll kick it off. It's a great point, Des. I mean, I mentioned earlier that a lot of times clients come to us when they're in the barrel or something bad's happening. When you're late to the game, the chances of actually being able to affect change are tougher. Having an ongoing presence, establishing that credibility, that relationship. And again, I'll speak to the state level. That churn of term limits is constantly ongoing. And so you're constantly re-educating members of the General Assembly. It's better just to be established and have somebody. Again, most people might not be familiar with any of your members' issues, right? So you have to connect those dots, be that trusted resource, but also try to take it back locally to them. The chances of success are always diminished when something bad is happening and you have to go walk in the door for the first time and say, hey, I'm here, this is important to me. So if you have those pre-established relationships and they trust you, that's the key. Are you a trusted resource? It's always better.
Yeah, and I'm really lucky that most of the clients I represent now, I've represented almost my entire career. So have these very long established relationships with my clients to where I know their issues, I know what they're going to care about. And I have some that are just, it's good when they don't hear from me for a while. That means that they can just go about their business, continue doing what's best for their enterprises and their professions, and they aren't under attack or under threat. So if you're able to have that established long-term relationship with a lobbyist, that's definitely beneficial, not just for us, because then again, we have more of an expertise in what you care about, what you're looking to accomplish, but also for the client as well.
Yeah, this also emphasizes why organizations like the Columbus Chamber are so critical, because if you are, for whatever reason, don't have the resources or just the knowledge that something is going on, you always have the backstop of the fantastic work that Des, Don, and the team at the Columbus Chamber are doing at all levels of government, and they are in those rooms as well. And Victor, I shot up when you were talking about the timing and whatnot, because it goes to that old military saying of if you're early to something, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, you do not want to even think about what's going on there. And that kind of applies to a particular business and perhaps a tax issue. And I think that we all get a little bit of pride in ourselves internally here, Tony, Victor, myself, at least I'll just say myself and Amanda, when you walk into a committee room, let's say Senate Ways and Means, and they see Victor Hipsley and they know, oh, this client's here listening right now. This client's here listening right now. And those legislators are thinking that as they see Victor walk into that committee room. And that's why you have those long-term type relationships, so that you can be ready to go when inevitably things get crazy.
And remember, at least in the legislature, Des, it's full-time, right? It's not a part-time legislature. They never go home. Well, they kind of do every once in a while, but it's 24/7, it seems like, right?
And I just think what Greg said is so spot on, that, we've got a lot of technology that has been very helpful in terms of the Ohio channel. All committees and sessions are live streamed, which is great for all of you. If you want to just check out something that happened, we can send archives to our clients so they can see it. But the point of us going to committee isn't to see them, it's for them to see us. So you still have to be there in person, and that Ohio channel just doesn't cut it. They don't know you're watching from home. And so we still have to be there in person.
One more question. Actually, I have a couple more, but just because of time, but I really like this question. Is there any organization or entity that you would not advocate for or lobby for? And how do you choose those particular clients, or not choose those particular clients? How do you make that judgment?
Hey, Des, we're going to put Tony on the spot. For the panelists, we're going to make Tony answer this one.
Oh, thanks, Victor. I appreciate it. I get the softball. All right. Well, I would say, first off, we don't need to take every potential client that, walks in the door. So that does give us, a bit of an opportunity to decide if it's an issue that we want to engage on. I think you got to take a lot of things into consideration. First and foremost, do we think we would be able to help the potential client achieve what it is that they're, wanting to achieve? I think, another thing that we always need to look at is, do we have any potential conflicts with existing clients? So you always have to do that gut check to make sure that you're not going to be wearing one hat at your 9 o'clock meeting and a different hat at the 9:15 and saying two completely opposite things, because that's not good for your credibility either. I think you've heard all of our panelists say multiple times today that this profession is built upon trust. And even though that may not be the public perception, it is very much, I think, a very real thing at the Statehouse, because if you go into a legislator's office and you burn them on an issue, you will not be able to go to that legislator ever again on anything, because they will not trust you. So I think the other things that we would take into consideration besides, are we able to help move an issue forward or not, or do we have any potential conflicts, is this, I think this usually, like if I'll speak at a school or something, we'll get a question like this. Do you ever represent any clients that you personally disagree with what they're advocating for? And so I think that's sort of the natural extension of that. And, fortunately, I feel like in my career, I have not been in that position. And so I think that there are plenty of issues that I've lobbied on that I would have had no knowledge or understanding, or have frankly even in my personal life have been impacted or cared about the item if it were not for a client or a client interest. But I have never been in a position where I have felt like I am morally opposed to something that we would be pursuing. And if we did have that moral concern, we wouldn't take the business.
Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect, Tony. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. And, as we conclude, just for, time purposes, I want to thank you all again for your time today, and everyone for joining us this morning. As you can see, there's a lot that goes into this industry and the work that they do and that we do as advocates, and how we advocate for our clients, and how I advocate for members of the Columbus Chamber. And so at the end of the day, again, thank you all for being panelists, and again, shedding your light and perspectives and insights on everything that you all do on a daily basis. So with that being said, we're going to conclude today, but thank you again to our moderator and panelists for their knowledge and participation in this morning's Government Spotlight. If you enjoyed today's program and would like to revisit the conversation at a later date, be sure to keep an eye out on your email. You should receive a link to the recorded program within the next 24 hours. We look forward to providing relevant and insightful programming for you in the future. Please be sure to visit the Columbus Chamber's website at columbus.org/events for more events like this one. We hope to see you all again soon. And again, thank you again for attending this morning. You all have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.